Hi there, how was your day? So Scarlet and Violet released a couple months ago now, to a mixed response. We don't need to dive into that rabbit hole now though, because they're not the subject of this video. Instead, we'll be talking about the two horror shows that came before it, the two games that single-handedly forced Game Freak to change, the two games that caused the internet to worry months before they even released, and oddly enough, the two games that were featured in my first ever YouTube video. But you should not watch that, I had no clue what I was doing and I barely had any clue how to even begin to structure any kind of review. These two games are of course Pokemon Sword and Pokemon Shield, the poster children for cockiness. These two games were put on absolute blast upon, hell, even before release, with fans tearing apart the game's PS2-esque graphics, blatant lack of story and 20-year-old gameplay. And playing through Scarlet upon release, and doing so again for a top secret project I'm working on, has got me wanting to look back upon these games once more. A look back to see if these games were as bad as everyone said they were, or if they were actually good. Sorry, I couldn't finish that line. Were people overreacting, or was the backlash justified? Well, join me today as we find out and see if Pokemon Sword and Shield hold up. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Pokemon Sword and Shield do not have a bad story. In fact, they have a legitimately really interesting one, especially when you consider the fact that this is a modern day Pokemon game before the likes of Legends Arceus and Scarlet and Violet. So, what is the issue? The issue here is that the game barely ever lets you play through the story. There are constantly interesting story beats being hit, and yet you never actually get to experience any of it. All you do is go from gym to gym, collecting badges. Maybe if you're lucky, a character will give you an in-depth description about what happened, and keep in mind, that's if you're lucky. For example, at some point late in the game, mysterious rumblings are heard off in the distance and you're told to go investigate this. As you make your way closer and closer to the source of these rumblings, you're told more and more by the people around you that there is something big running rampant, and it begins to seem like you might be in charge of dealing with this thing. But nope, by the time you get there, another trainer has already dealt with it and someone tells you about what happened instead. It turns out that a wild Pokemon suddenly grew giant for no apparent reason and had to be taken down by the champion. Side note, the picture they show of this happening is absolutely hilarious. It's so obvious that they just turned the Pokemon model on its side to show that it had been knocked down. And this isn't the only time something this interesting is dealt with off screen. I couldn't count with both my fingers and toes the amount of times the climax is wasted off screen and we are instead told about something that would have been so amazing to experience. But you know what I can count using just the fingers on one of my hands? The amount of times you yourself get to deal with one of these interesting situations. Let's go through the list, shall we? The beginning of the game when you follow a rogue Pokemon into the forest, after challenging the 4th gym when you have to deal with an outline trainer, after you finish the semi-finals of the gym challenge and you have to hunt down the champion, and the climax of the game when you take down the big bad. That is 4 times of note! I hope I've forgotten some stuff, because if I can't recall more than 4 interesting story beats the player gets to experience themselves after I've just played the game this last week, then maybe, just maybe, I didn't get to experience all too many interesting story beats. And the worst part is the fact that this game is constantly telling you what you missed out on. It feels like the game is rubbing it in your face. Outside of these 4 times of note, you'll mostly just be going from gym to gym. In between these gyms, you might fight a member of Team Yell, or maybe you'll fight Harp, or maybe you'll fight Team Yell, or maybe you'll fight Harp, or maybe you'll fight Team Yell, or maybe you'll fight Team Yell. And it's not just the story beats that are wasted, as the characters within the story are also completely thrown aside. There are so many interesting characters: Bede, Marnie, Sonia, the champion, the chairman, literally all of the gym leaders, and barely of them ever show up. These characters will talk to you from time to time, tease you with some interesting lore and characterization before just disappearing for another 4 hours. For example, let's look at Marnie. Marnie is the younger sister of the Dark-type gym leader Piers. They both grew up in a rough town that I'm guessing was inspired by Birmingham, and she shows throughout the story that while she puts on a tough mask and acts big, she's a genuinely sweet, caring girl when you get to know her. You even start developing an absolutely adorable little friendship with her. And yet throughout the whole nearly 30-hour runtime of the game, you battle her about 3 times, and outside of those battles, you don't tend to interact much. This also stings a little more for me because they made her a Janna, and it's like, why couldn't we have a Janna girl be our main rival? Why? But do you know who we do get to see a lot? Do you know who is our main rival? This way, old lump, who will just not leave me alone. If you thought the amount of times the climax was wasted was bad, wait until you see the amount of times you're stopped by this way, old pillock. Up until the first gym alone, he stops you almost 20 times. Trust me, I've been keeping score, and almost none of these encounters are useful, do something for the plot, or even make you like him. So of course, after all that, the game spends most of the time on him and his arc. If you want me to care about him, don't make him the most annoying bugger to ever exist. By the end of the game, when I'm supposed to view him as my close friend, I wanted nothing more but for him to bugger off and leave me with the actual bearable characters. This story has to be a 4 out of 10. While there are many moments of what could end up being great storytelling, they always end up falling flat or just not happening to you at all. And after Scarlet and Violet, this story just seems even more pathetic. We've seen just what a console Pokemon story can be, and this just isn't it. Prepare to hear me say something good about Pokemon Sword and Shield, because the world of the Galar region is just lovely. And of course it's based off of the UK, the land of mushy peas, chavs, and my king's fat fingers. Now as a part of British lad myself, I might be biased, but can you blame me? Do you know how long I waited for a UK based game ever since they started basing regions off of actual places? And it's not just my inner Brit talking, because this is a genuinely charming world with a lot to love. As a resident of the UK, it's clear to me just how much research they did and just how accurate they made everything here. The houses are British, the slang is British, even the bins are British. Although I will say that we do not describe things as pets. I don't know where they got that from, but it is wrong. And it even freaks me out. But by far one of my favourite examples of this is the new gym stadiums. The gym stadiums of these games are very heavily modelled off of football stadiums, and even if I don't take interest in football, just in case you couldn't tell, it is still a pretty big part of our culture, and I love the fact that it's included here. By the way, this is football. This is rugby with extra steps. And if you have a problem with that, although beyond just the towns, the rest of this game can feel pretty linear. The routes are straightforward as all hell, and for a game on a console, this map layout is pretty indefensible. But outside of all this, I have a little conspiracy theory to share with you. This is Hulbury, one of the towns you'll have to visit in the game, and I've looked far and wide to find the inspiration behind it, and by that I mean I read a few articles online, and they have all given me different answers on what real world town inspired Hulbury. So I am putting my foot forward as a proud Plymothian to say that Hulbury is 100% inspired by Plymouth. Allow me to reveal to you my proof. Proof number 1, it looks very similar, sharing a lot of landmarks and whatnot. The lighthouse is Smeaton's Tower, you have the monster statue thingies, the general layout of the buildings, the docks, which Plymouth is very well known for, the vastly stretching ocean. Need I go on? Proof number 2, the water gym is here. Plymouth is known as Britain's Ocean City, so the fact that the water gym is here has my Janus senses tingling. Proof number 3, Plymouth holds a lot of cultural importance. For those of you who don't know, the Pilgrims actually left in the Mayflower from Plymouth. And as well as that, one of history's most famous sailors, Sir Francis Drake, hails from here, making Plymouth not only a decently active tourist destination, but also a place with enough cultural significance that Game Freak would want to pay homage to it. And that concludes my theory, and also my headcanon. I'm honestly really glad that despite the blatant lack of care towards the gameplay and graphics, the developers still put a lot of genuine focus into the world of this game. It definitely does soften the blow of a UK-based game being the worst in the series to know that at least they did us justice in all of our chippy worshipping goodness. 9 out of 10. The gameplay of Pokemon Sword and Shield feels just like the gameplay in Pokemon Red and Blue, and by that I don't mean it will send you back to your childhood, I mean it will make you feel like you're playing a 20-year-old game. First, let's fish out the positives. Oh my god, the wild area is great. This was the biggest area we'd seen in Pokemon before Legends and Scarlet and Violet came out, and if you look past the awful graphics, there is a lot of fun to be had here. First of all, the exploration here is pretty solid, in fact it's one of the few areas in the game that actively made me want to look around. It also sports a ton of Pokemon ranging from weak and pitiful to dear god please have mercy. And by far the most exciting Pokemon based inclusion are the raid battles. A raid battle is where you and 4 other trainers, bots or real people depending on whether you're online or offline, work together to take down one big Dynamax or Gigantamax Pokemon, like a cutesy Godzilla movie. And for more cutesy Pokemon action, you can open up Pokemon Camp where you, well, camp with your Pokemon. You can talk to your Pokemon, play with them, cook food for them, overall it's fine, and it will even have an effect on how your Pokemon perform in battle, which is neat I guess. It is pretty neat playing Scarlet and Violet now just to see how much they lifted from a wild area. The raids, the exploration, the camping, all of it made it over to Scarlet and Violet, be it in a much more prominent and polished way. Outside of a wild area, yeah, this is most certainly a Pokemon game alright. You go through the gym system, catch your favourite Pokemon, maybe even all of them if you feel like it, but I can't really give this game credit for that. It didn't come up with this format, Red and Blue did over 2 decades ago now. I guess my point is the formula is still decently fun, but like, yeah, it's Pokemon. And that about concludes our positives. Yup, a whole minute's worth of positives. And how long did we spend complaining? Oh dear god. Well, let's get a move on and talk about the negatives, starting off again by talking about the wild area, because as much fun as it is to explore this thing, we need to talk about all of its downfalls. First of all, the performance of the game itself absolutely tanks when you enter the wild area. I am talking constant pop-ins, stuttering and frame drops. And it's not just the wild area, I'm constantly picking up on shoddy frame rates no matter where I am in the game. This would be understandable if it wasn't for this being on the same console Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey and Splatoon 2 and 3 released on. All beautiful games that can have their moments, sure, but mostly run at constant FPS ranging from 30 to 60 respectively, barely ever dipping if at all, but with Sword and Shield, it's a consistent issue. I notice it especially whenever I use my bike or start a battle, and if you're going to tell me that the solution is just avoiding doing either of these things, then you're basically just telling me to not bother playing with how big each of these features are, sometimes even being mandatory. And outside of the performance, there really isn't that much to do in the wild area. The game makes you want to explore, but there really isn't anything to find, and once you're tired of raid battles, you're kinda just left with nothing. And trust me, you will get tired of those raid battles, because especially later on in the game, they can get unbelievably tedious. Well, yes, to begin with, going from raid battle to raid battle is fun, by the end of the game, Dynamax Pokemon will constantly be putting up shields that will stop you from dishing out any form of notable damage, stopping any momentum a battle had in its tracks. For some reason, this is what the developers went for to make the battles feel more difficult as the game goes on, instead of, oh, I don't know, just giving us stronger and rarer Pokemon to fight. This also results in the battles taking an unreasonable amount of time. In fact, I once had a battle take over 10 minutes to complete, and by the end, I was practically falling asleep. And as far as the gameplay goes outside of a wild area, it could not be more barren and repetitive if it tried. Like I spoke about earlier, you almost never interact with the story, meaning most of the gameplay boils down to going from gym to gym to gym. This would be more bearable if there was some challenge involved or some exploration in between, and judging by the tone of this review so far, do you think I'm going to say that there is, or do you think I'm going to spend the next minute or two complaining about the fact that there isn't? The gameplay in between each gym is a simple point A to point B, no twists, no turns, and absolutely no exploration. The paths here, as mentioned, are as linear as they get. And don't even think about straying away from said linearity, because there will always be someone or something to stop you from doing so. What's that? You want to go over here? Well, the game doesn't want you to, so here's a random guy blocking you off. Copy and paste that a few times and you'll have a AAA release from the highest grossing media franchise of all time. To make the linear pathways all the more tedious, however, is the battles you'll get into on them, because oh my god is this game easy. This game series has never been the most difficult in the world, and I'm not one of those snotty people who ramble on about how easy games are nowadays, but this is ridiculous. There is a difference between kid-friendly and mindless, and trust me when I say the gameplay here is entirely mindless. As long as your team is well-rounded enough to deal with type matchups, or you have one ridiculously over-leveled Pokemon, you'll have no problem taking down the 50 trainers in between each gym, let alone the gym leader themselves. And getting that well-rounded team or one over-leveled Pokemon is ridiculously easy thanks to the excessive amount of XP boosts you're given throughout the game. Even just a few of the medium XP boosts will make your Pokemon level up multiple times, which entirely destroys the point of even playing the game. And you're given at least 5 of these every time you beat a raid battle. And while we're on the topic of experience, let's talk about the experience share, because you cannot turn it off. Why? It being there as an option is great. People who struggle with the game will have an easier time, and if you're a busy person, you have a much faster and convenient method of play. But completely removing the option to turn it off was so unnecessary. Now people who want the challenge of training up each Pokemon individually just can't, because Game Freak woke up and chose violence. This also makes it so much harder to grow connected to your Pokemon. I don't feel like I've spent time growing with these little guys, because half of them have just sat in my pocket all game. After that, you think that at least these easy battles must be over quickly, but no, these battles still take multiple minutes because of all the crap shoved into them. Every time you deal damage, you have to watch that health bar crawl. Every time you knock out an opponent, you're told how much XP each individual Pokemon got and who leveled up. You're constantly told about how your Pokemon are feeling. There's a bunch of awkward gaps in between moves at times. It's all awful. Yet again, some of this would still be understandable if these games were still releasing on a handheld, but they're not. This is a full-price AAA console experience, making shortcomings like this a lot less easy to forgive and a lot more blatant. And that is easily the biggest problem with the gameplay and even the game as a whole. It still feels like it was developed for a handheld. Nothing about this game seems to be pushing the hardware or outside motion controls even utilizing it. I'm not asking for the game to reinvent the wheel, all I'm asking for is for the highest grossing media franchise of all time to make their console video game feel competent. Or at the very least make their first real, original home console experience feel like it. Because let's be honest, this doesn't feel like the franchise's first original console experience. If you lower the resolution and screen ratio, you have yourself a glorified 3DS game from a series that was already beginning to feel repetitive. For my scoring, I'm going to give the gameplay a 4 out of 10. This game makes zero strides towards bringing the series forward into the home console world and somehow manages to feel less creative than its decade-old counterparts. It's overly reliant on the decades-old formula, and where it does try something different, it's so poorly thought out and executed that I just can't bring myself to care. Oh my god. These are quite possibly the worst visuals I have ever seen in a $60 AAA game, not to mention the dumper in the room that this comes from the highest grossing media franchise to ever exist. I have so much to talk about, but I'm going to have to do so in a rapid fire round. 3, 2, 1. These animations are some of the laziest things I've ever seen, and I cannot tell you the amount of times a character model was just rotated a couple of degrees while its walking animation was played on loop and it was called a day. The battle animations are even worse. What makes this thing even more is the fact that over 400 Pokemon were cut from a base game, and even when DLC is taken into account, there are still more than 200 Pokemon missing. And then you have a more general presentation, texturing, performance, etc., which are all disgusting. Look at this grass, look at this tree, look at this backdrop. In fact, almost all the backdrops are lazy looking and reused over and over again. Sometimes the backdrops don't even come close to suiting the location you're in. Why is the mound brown when the floor of the mound is coming out of his red? There are times when the game does look genuinely nice, which why can you have the rest of the game look like this? I would allow the excuse of prioritizing gameplay, but you've already seen the gameplay, and I know that just didn't happen. Why is his mouth moving like that? And can we talk about how often stuff is reused? And I don't just mean assets from this game, I mean there are whole animations ripped straight out of older titles and applied to new models, which why? What was the budget for this game again? Damn. Were you even trying to hide the fact that these two are exactly the same, or did you give up? Why does the wild area look like actual crap? Shouldn't this area have been prioritized? How come the weather changes every 2 seconds? The high quality models on the 120p looking environments actually made me throw up. The fact that every time something that would have taken actual effort to animate happens, the screen just fades to black is the cheapest thing ever in a video game. Why did they just hand me nothing? Why aren't there more fully animated scenes? These look amazing. How many copies of this game are sold? Damn. So much emphasis is put into the fact that you now have control of the camera, but it's only in the wild area and you can't even look up. And that concludes our lightning round. In short, the graphics are laughable. 3 out of 10. Even Scarlet and Violet and all their play-doughy, slow motion, crashing every few minutes goodness are at the very least more bearable to look at. Pokemon music has always been pretty decent, and Sword and Shield are no different. The music here is pretty solid, and there are a lot of tracks that I would gladly listen to, like Hop's theme, Marnie's theme, and the raid music. But what is easily my personal favourite is the gym music, because wow is this a cultural slap in the face. Near the latter half of a gym battle, when the gym leader is down to 1 Pokemon and they have to Gigantamax it, the onlookers in the stadium will start chanting this energetic song. Which is A, ridiculously brilliant to battle through, and B, ridiculously accurate to how British people act during football matches. It also isn't afraid to get all cinematic and epic when needed. It astonishes me how good the music in this game is, considering how terrible everything else is. 9 out of 10. All around decent music, but I even think top Scarlet and Violet. Sword and Shield is like a big old pile of poop. It smells, looks, and is awful, and the little nuggets of sweet corn sticking out of it just aren't enough to stop this toilet from clogging. Does it hold up? Absolutely not. Was the backlash justified? Absolutely. But hey, on the bright side, it seems like the backlash may have been worth it after all, because ever since we've gotten games like Legends Arceus and Scarlet and Violet, we can finally say that Game Freak is trying to do something creative and that they've finally listened, even if their games still run at the same speeds I do. Now without any further ado, let's find out the final score. 5.8 out of 10. The lowest score ever given on this channel. Trust me, I did the maths. If you enjoyed the video, please do consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. It would really help out a lot. Well, I've been Wobbly with an IE. You've been amazing. Have a lovely day. Did they just fly away? Jesus Christ, this game is awful.